Dragonlance is one of the most well-known D&D settings, probably thanks to the multitude of novels. These novels introduced me to fantasy literature as a kid, but I have never played or ran a game set in the Dragonlance setting, and never wanted to. It just didn't appeal to me at all. I will go as far as to say that I have never even seen anyone recruiting for a Dragonlance game, or even talk much about the setting. Why? I don't know for sure, but if I were to speculate, I would say that it had to do with two things. First, while I haven't even read the AD&D Dragonlance Adventure modules, I have seen people say online that they were very bad and incredibly railroaded. That might have left a bad impression about the setting. Second, I believe that not many even knew that there were Dragonlance books for D&D 3.5. If I understand things correctly, only the Dragonlance campaign setting book was published by Wizards of the Coast, and the rest of the books were published by Sovereign Press, but they were licensed by Wizards of the Coast. So most of the books straddle the line between first-party and third-party content. I have even seen the term second-party content thrown around, but it makes no sense. But what about the setting itself? It didn't catch my eye, I didn't like it much, but I admit that I haven't even been hooked enough to read the books more thoroughly. I'm sure that there are Dragonlance fans out there, but that's not me. However, I believe that some parts of it would work much better in GURPS than in D&D. For example, the restricted nature of arcane magic would work excellently with the various social disadvantages and mechanics of GURPS. Despite not liking the setting itself, when I was working on my own setting, I decided to borrow some Dragonlance elements that I did like. And I'd like to talk about what I borrowed and how I did that. Dragonlance is all about dragons. You can glean that from the name. Surprisingly, the setting doesn't really have many new dragon types. Aquatic, sea, fire, frost, and amphi-dragons, and I believe that's it. They can easily be used in any other setting. But there is also a unique Dragonlance exclusive, I guess, dragon subtype, the Dragon Overlords. At a certain point of the setting's history, several dragons arrived from an alien world, possibly a different plane. These dragons were much larger than even the great worms, and had the knowledge of how to craft skull totems. These alien dragons began to cannibalize the native dragon population and build totems from their skulls. These totems allowed them to alter the landscape to their liking and create powerful magical effects on a large scale. How do you represent this in GURPS? I am a proponent of using magic as powers, and at the first glance it seems that there are no ritual casting mechanics for this scale of spellcasting. However, there is a quite obscure advantage that you can find in GURPS Supers, Ultra Power. Essentially, this is the Gadgeteer advantage, but for powers. Its externally boosted limitation can represent the aforementioned Skull Totem. Sure, the mechanics are quite vague, but that's still much better than nothing. Dragon Overlords also could use their Skull Totems to observe their domain. This can be done by creating an ability based on Detect or Clear Sentience, with the Area Perception modifier from GURPS powers, Totems and Nature Spirits. That's another obscure option. Dragon Overlords can definitely be used in other settings as well. After all, they did come to Kryn from somewhere, and they might come to the world of your making too. The dragon immediately becomes a major NPC of the world and defines an entire region or nation. You can easily make an entire campaign centered on a Dragon Overlord. Another draconic element in the Dragonlance setting is the Draconian race. These draconic humanoids were created by tainting the eggs of metallic dragons. At first, they served as the soldiers of the forces of evil, but if I recall things correctly, they mellowed out a bit later. Also, eggs of chromatic dragons were experimented on too, but they gave rise to the noble draconians that were paragons of good. That's unexpected. Each kind of draconian had a unique ability, death throws. Some exploded into shards of bone upon death, some turned to stone and made the weapon that killed them stuck, and so on. These abilities really made the Draconians stand out from the lineup of Draconic D&D races, and created unique tactical situations. I love it. But you might think, how do I make an ability in GURPS that is triggered upon death? It's actually pretty easy. You can find guidelines for such abilities on Jason Levine's website. I will link it in the description. In short, you apply Backlash, Instant Death, minus 300%, and divide the final cost of the ability by 5, as for other single-use abilities. I use this approach in some of my monster write-ups, and let me tell you, you can cram in a very powerful effect into a 1-point perk. While the Draconians might seem like a Dragonlance exclusive race, I think that they can be adapted to other settings. After all, you probably remember the Dragonborn of Bahamut race from D&D 3.5, and it had a very similar concept. Of course, then they were replaced by the bland and generic Dragonborn race with different flavor in the 4th and 5th editions, but I pretend that those Dragonborn do not exist. If you borrow the Draconians from Dragonlance, then you can also expand upon the concept. For example, we know about metallic and chromatic Draconians, but what if the same ritual is performed on a psionic gem dragon egg? You could have a race of gem Draconians that, for example, upon death created powerful psionic shock that wipes the last week from the memory of everyone within 10 yards. And what about Draconians created from the eggs of the Oriental Long Dragons? There is a lot of potential here, I believe, and I am considering porting the Draconians over to my setting as I am writing the script for this video. Speaking of cool Dragonlance races, do you know whom I haven't mentioned yet? No, not the Kenders, the Yagg-Ghoul. It might be a surprise for you, but Dragonlance has a unique Mind Flayer variant. The Yagg-Ghoul are Mind Flayers who got isolated in the deep jungles and degenerated there. They are taller and stronger than the normal Mind Flayers, but are much less intelligent. They possess only some of their typical psionic abilities, but still can extract brains with their tentacles. The Yagg-Ghoul are split into two castes, the barbaric Savage Yagg-Ghoul and the mystical Elite Yagg-Ghoul. I think that this is a very interesting take on the Mind Flayer race, and one that can coexist with the traditional Illithids. I am definitely stealing them for my setting. Finally, Dragonlance also had an interesting class, from the lore standpoint at least, the Mystic. If you are familiar with the setting's history, you might know that there was a period of time where all the gods had forsaken Krynn. Well, actually all but one, but that's not important. Mystics are spellcasters who have learned to channel divine energy without worshipping or even acknowledging any deity. The process of harnessing this magic is one of inner awareness and self-discovery, a private faith that leads to great magical power. In my setting, I wrote that the source of Mystic's power is not well understood. Some believe that mystics tap into the divine energies that the gods have imbued into all creatures when populating the worlds. Some think that the mystics use the innate potential to become a deity, and some think that their powers are granted by a secretive deity that despises all other deities. And this is how it works in terms of mechanics. The scope of mystic's power is very narrow. This should be roughly equivalent to a single college of magic. If you are using Sorcerer's Empowerment, then this is a minus 40% limitation. All abilities have the Divine Power modifier that requires the Mystic to take the Disciplines of Faith Mysticism disadvantage. Should you transgress your personal beliefs, you instantly lose your powers, but you return them after completing a minor quest. Despite being classified as divine spells, mystical spells do not depend on sanctity. Mystical spellcasting is subject to repeated attempts. For hardcore improvisation or using abilities from default, mystics use a meditation skill instead of religious ritual or thaumatology. When rolling a critical failure on a casting roll, use the Oriental table from GURPS Thaumatology. The Mystic is a very limited alternative to a Cleric or a Favored Soul, but it has a different, distinct flavor. And no Mystics are the same, as their faith is personal. I think that it's a good addition to almost any D&D-like setting. And that's it. These are the things that really stand out to me in the Dragonlance setting. I borrowed most of them for my setting and I suggest you do the same. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.